It's a couple of minutes past the hour, but we're going to begin in the interest of everyone's time. I know we still have people joining us here, so I'm going to leave the instructions for webinar participation up for just a moment and welcome you to the Charrettes Go virtual webinar hosted by the National Charrette Institute and the Form-Based Codes Institute. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening in some cases, depending on your time zone. My name is Holly Medill, and I'm the director of the National Charrette Institute at Michigan State University. These instructions are also in your Q&A and are available for your assistance. We're going to be using the question and answer feature, the Q&A button, for technical and content related questions. So I would be remiss if we didn't begin by saying that this webinar and case study were both sponsored by current healthcare crises. And I also would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the incredible circumstances and hardships that many of us are facing today. One too fast. So although we are experiencing this differently, we are all experiencing this together. On this webinar today, we're really excited that we reached capacity in relatively short order. Unfortunately, though, many won't be able to join us live, but we are recording this and making this available on both of our websites in the next week or so. On this webinar, we have 18 countries represented across the globe, and we have 49 states within the United States represented. So clearly today's content is resonating with you. The current coronavirus climate has many of us thinking how to shift what we do from in-person to online processes. There seems to be no shortage of webinars and forums for us to think about how we might be able to do that. So I'm thankful that you prioritize this webinar today and that you're spending this time with us today. So thank you, and it will not disappoint. I'm very pleased to join Marta Goldsmith and Tyler Quinn Smith from the Form-Based Codes Institute to bring you today's webinar that will focus on how a community visioning effort in Missoula, Montana pivoted in the middle of a pandemic to a fully virtual charrette, all while utilizing the NCI charrette approach. And so I'll ask Marta to jump in here.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. We are thrilled that so many of you have chosen to join us despite whatever hour it may be. Obviously, this is a difficult time and an important topic. On behalf of the Form-Based Codes Institute, which is a program of Smart Growth America, we're delighted to co-sponsor this webinar with the National Charrette Institute. We will begin today with a very brief overview of the National Charrette Institute approach to charrettes with Bill Leonards, and then the example of an online charrette will be presented by a representative from Missoula, Montana, Tom Zavitz, and then also Jason King from Dover Kohl and Partners, who actually organized and led the charrette. And we also are pleased to have Victor Dover on the call as well, a founding member of, founding principal at Dover Kohl and Partners, to help answer questions and guide us through this process. Then we will talk a little bit about lessons learned and the pros and cons of going virtual with this very personal format and what we learned in the process. We will have Q&A, and we will once again remind you to please write your questions in the Q&A box, and we will answer as many of them as we can, and I'll field them to the panelists. Then finally, please stay to the end, because at the end we will have, as we finish the webinar, we will have a very simple 3 or 4 question survey about the webinar, and in particular, we will be asking you what other topics around the question of community engagement you would like us to address in this series. So please be sure to answer the questions to provide us with real-time guidance on what else you would like to hear about. And so now we'll move on. Holly, I think, tell you a little bit about who we are. We are, as I said, we are part of Smart Growth America, which is a national organization that, through technical assistance, advocacy, and thought leadership, we realize our vision of livable places, healthy people, and shared prosperity. And we believe that America should be a country that no matter where you live or who you are, you can enjoy living in a place that's healthy, prosperous, and resilient. The Form-Based Codes Institute, Holly, thank you, is a part of Smart Growth America, and we provide information, education, and technical assistance related to form-based codes. We recognize and publicize exemplary codes, and we are a forum for discussion on how form-based codes can be used to promote smart growth. So that's a little bit about us, and Holly, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Marta. So a little bit about NCI next too is that NCI was founded in 2000 in Portland, Oregon as a nonprofit with the mission to train practitioners to help communities achieve self-transformation using the method of charrettes. In 2016, NCI's curriculum came to Michigan State University, and NCI is now housed within the School of Planning, Design, and Construction. NCI joined 4 degree granting programs within the school, including urban and regional planning, interior design, landscape architecture, and construction management. We take a holistic approach to thinking about the built environment from the inside out and from multiple scales. NCI is also closely associated with Michigan State University Extension. In addition to conducting charrettes and coaching others through their management and facilitation of them, we provide certificate trainings. We've trained over 3,500 practitioners all across the globe, and the charrette process and curriculum that we teach is based on over 30 years of learnings conducting charrettes. Our goal in this training is to transfer that knowledge and that insight from those past charrettes to participants so they can learn from not only the learnings and the mistakes that were made, but also the victories of past charrettes. We also have content and resources related to online engagement embedded within this curriculum, and our certificate training, our system certificate training is also available online. So now I'm going to turn it over to Bill Leonards and ask him to give us a brief overview of the charrette system process.
Okay, so all right. Thank you, Holly. Let me get this going here, right? Okay. Holly, thank you. You know, this is Bill Leonards in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, remote participation tools have been part of the NCI trainings almost from the beginning 20 years ago when I co-founded NCI here in Portland. We call them high-tech, high-touch charrettes. So at NCI, we've always viewed distance participation as a complement to the in-person charrettes and events. And that's been the industry standard. And that is until now. We think that Missoula may be the first multiple-day charrette conducted completely remotely. So that gives us a lot to talk about. I'm going to set the stage by presenting the NCI standard to prepare for and conduct a charrette, and then Tom and Jason will show what happened in Missoula and start the conversation. Okay, so how does NCI define a charrette? Well, for NCI, it's simply a co-design process with 3 feedback loops. It's collaborative, inclusive, multidisciplinary, and it results in a detailed, feasible plan. But it is not, and I get this all the time, not just a one-day workshop, nor is it a marathon where everyone has to quit their job to be involved. So NCI teaches you how to assess your project to determine, among other things, the right number of days. As a rule, NCI charrettes last a minimum of 4 or more contiguous days. This in order to accommodate the feedback loops. So in general, the more complicated the projects, the longer the charrette. This diagram illustrates how a multiple day charrette engages people in the design process. The design process is shown on the bottom, feedback loops are shown on the top. More on this a bit later from Jason. At NCI, we call the entire project process the charrette system, shown here in the curriculum summary. A successful charrette is preceded by a period of rigorous preparation that could last anywhere from 1 to 9 months. So a lot goes on during charrette preparation, but I'm just going to highlight 2 areas related to the webinar today: the project assessment and the stakeholder assessment. NCI has several assessment exercises that inform the project process, scope, and budget. Complexity analysis includes assessment of the project's political complexity. So for highly political complex projects or volatile projects, you may need to bring some special tools in, such as monitoring for civil dialogue, requiring registration to participate online, extra good public participation, public meeting facilitation, shorter and maybe more feedback loops, and maybe longer charrettes to accommodate that. So more on this in the next webinars. Hey, charrette ready is charrette preparation is about getting charrette ready. So being charrette ready means being people ready, data ready, and place or logistics ready. Today, I'm going to focus here on the people part. But, okay, stakeholder assessment is about identifying the people and earning their trust in the process. Trust with a capital T, right? But who are the people? For NCI, overall, they are people whose lives are affected by the outcome, as well as anyone who can affect the outcome. And under this big umbrella, we need to be diligent to include those historically left out of the process, those who supply valuable information, people who might have the power to promote the project or block the project, and of course, the decision makers. Now, you also need to check this list to make sure you've included all the relevant viewpoints. It's impossible to include everybody, right? I mean, sooner or later, someone inevitably complains about being left out. That can't be avoided. And when we do hear from them, we really want to involve them. But what is essential to the process is that their viewpoint is represented. One more note on involvement. Some people are inevitably more involved than others. So in this diagram, it shows 3 different levels of participation. In the center are primary levels of like project sponsors, key approval agencies, key landowners. The secondary level, those are non-governmental organizations, organized groups, neighborhood groups, and the general level is everybody else on the list. So the most important thing is that the people in all 3 circles are involved at the key decision-making points, or what we call the feedback loops. So finally, we do have a list. We have a checklist of 10 things we think are important to this NCI charrette system. To give Jason and Tom enough time, I'm not going to go through every one of these things. I touched on many of them already, but just go to the NCI website or take our courses to find out more about these things. Okay, so there's an overview of the pertinent points from the NCI charrette systems training. Here's my contact info to my CDI website, and which is the home of my Charrette Way blog that's about all things charrette. So, Jason, take it away.
And I think it is Tom, take it away.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Tom, take it away.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. This is Tom Zavitz, and I'm a senior planner for the city of Missoula and the city's project manager for the Mullan Area Master Plan. And this project is a pretty big project for us in Missoula because it will determine the land uses and transportation grid for the last large area of undeveloped land in the valley. Next slide. Jason, please. Or someone, whoever can go to the next slide. Okay, great. I'm going to give you a short background about Missoula and then tell you how we arrived. Oh, and back up, you can back up one, Jason, and tell you how we arrived at conducting the initial stakeholder outreach for the project virtually. So Missoula is a city of about 70,000 people with a total of about 100,000 residents in the valley as a whole. We're located in the Rocky Mountains in western Montana, and you can see in this photo, taken from a mountain on the east side of the valley, that the city is surrounded by mountains. And that can present challenges, obviously, when it comes to planning for a growing population. And one of those challenges at the moment is quickly rising housing costs, which is similar to most parts of the country, and our lack of space to build and expand is a big factor here. Now we can do the next slide. So from the aerial photo, you can see that almost all of our valley floor is developed right now, except for the project area, which is currently a hay farm, and that has recently come up for sale. It's also an area the city expects to annex in the next 20 years. And right now it's outside the city limits. You can go to the next slide. So along with the land coming onto the market, the city and county had partnered to win a federal road building grant that makes it possible to construct the major arterial streets for the area. And that plan had been underway for about 20 years, but it just so happened that last year we were able to win a build grant, which is the federal grant that I was talking about. And so we needed to be able to use that money within the 5-year allotment that's given. So with these events coming together and the development proposals beginning to materialize, the city and county have decided to partner on a project to plan the area ahead of development. We chose, and this happened really in November, December of just last year. So this was moving along pretty quickly for us. We chose the consultants Dover Kohl to do the master planning. And we had seen their work on the downtown master plan the year before, and which was very robust and involved many stakeholder meetings, drop-in studios, and charrettes. And that structure really impressed us. So we hired Dover Kohl this past January, and they quickly designed a week of meetings and charrettes to take place the last week of March. However, with less than a week to go, and so I think we're talking about the third week of March now, the coronavirus health emergency caused the city to stop holding public meetings. And as we were looking at options, including putting the entire master plan on hold, we found out that the road building project, which is separate, had to maintain their deadlines. So they were going to continue moving forward through this health emergency. And obviously then this meant that we would have to figure out how to hold public stakeholder meetings to be able to inform the road project about design. Or we could let that project move ahead and risk having roads designed in ways that might not be conducive to modern land planning, and I'm talking there about walkability and transit. So next slide, Jason. So we needed to think through some considerations really quickly, and immediately Jason at Dover Kohl was communicating to me that he thought it would be possible to continue to move ahead on the same schedule, although with virtual meetings. the city administration was leery of conducting any type of public meeting during the coronavirus event for a few reasons, but especially that we would be giving the impression that we were moving along with a project and foregoing public input. And in Missoula, we have a really engaged population, and one of our biggest priorities is always to involve the public as much as possible, especially up front in our projects. So we had to determine if it was even possible to retain the stakeholder involvement while being sensitive to everyone's need to focus on their own health and safety. And then we had the question of, would an online method be accessible enough to the public? So one of the first things I did was speak with some of the potential stakeholders by phone and talk about, hey, what if we didn't do these in person, but what if we did these through a virtual format and or over the phone? But and most of the people that I talked to, in fact, everyone was willing to give this a try. And I think that you know, some of the advantages of doing this virtually started to come into play, like, hey, I don't have to get up and move from my desk, or I don't even have to go into work and I can participate. So I really found a lot of favorability there. I got the support of my department director, and, you know, with knowing our history with Dover Kohl, and that they just did things in a very sincere way, in a robust manner, we decided to move ahead. And, you know, at that point, I have to say that was one of the toughest decisions I've had, because it just was territory we hadn't been in before. So at this point, city government is still open. We didn't want to put anybody at risk by asking them to participate in person. And given Dover Kohl's plans and experience, we felt confident to do this without putting anybody else in danger. So at this point, I want to hand it over to Jason. And again, remind you, right at this point, we're in the third week of March, and we had about 3 business days, I think, maybe less than that, to re-invite about 250 participants and the public. And things were getting pretty tight, and so I'll let Jason take over from there as to what they did next.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so my name is Jason King with Dover Kohl and Partners. We're going to be continue to talk about the Mullan Area Master Plan and the Charrette, and you can go and see everything that we're going to be talking about at mullanareamasterplan.com. So we were all ready to go to Missoula and run really great projects like this one. I take the kids, and I take my wife who works at Dover Kohl. We take the mother-in-law to babysit, and this is a picture of the first time we went to Missoula. I live in Miami. It was the first time my kids ever saw snow. So we were excited to go sledding, and then COVID. So instead, as Tom said, working with the city and the county, we had to transition really quick, just a couple working days. And for most people, this is what the virtual charrette looked like. They'd go to the website first, mullanareamasterplan.com, and they'd see the virtual charrette hub. And things had to happen quick and on a budget. And so the website was created on Squarespace. And we created a variety of films using PowerPoint. PowerPoint's got a great little film feature that everybody's able to use. We made YouTube films, we embedded them, and all of a sudden, with just a few days of preparation, we were going virtual. So when you get to the website, and all this is still available and still live, you click and you can see the overview film. And the overview film, shortly after the charrette had been, in total, been watched by over 300 people. Now it's about 5 weeks since the charrette, and nearly 500 people have watched the film. The website has seen 18,000 visits. So that's pretty incredible. Then if you scroll down on the website, you see this. This is the virtual charrette calendar. We use Talkify, a web calendar, which is inexpensive. And then this calendar is where we had all the different WebEx meetings. And you could click on this, and you would you'd either watch the video releases that we were doing, the presentations. We had 13 stakeholder meetings. We had 8 virtual studio sessions. And it's important to note that, we had a lot of people that were invited beforehand to the meetings. And then there was another large percentage, that joined the meetings. All of the meetings, every single thing that we did during the week was open to absolutely anybody that wanted to join. So they would click on and they would either enter into the virtual studio or one of the stakeholder meetings. And the stakeholder meetings involved environment and transportation and economic development, landowners, historic preservationists. As Bill talked about, we tried to make sure all viewpoints were represented. And in the meetings, in the stakeholder meetings, there'd be slides, and we were pinning up all of our work, and we were making revisions as we went along, and we were answering questions. And then the virtual studio is where you could talk to. We were working with IMEG, a local engineering firm. We were working with Jacobs, a local transportation firm. You could talk to our planners. You could talk to landscape architects or architects. You could talk to myself. You could talk to members of the county or the city. We had sort of office hours that were available to anybody to join us. Then if you go further down on the website, you see these day-by-day summaries. It's kind of like a travel journal for the week ahead. And we talked about what would happen on day 1 and day 2, day 5. And then we, at the end of the day, we would post all of the results. What we heard, what we learned, how it modifies what we were drawing, all the different perspectives and viewpoints. And we tried to hear, again, to quote Bill, to hear from everyone whose lives would be affected by the outcome. And we made a lot of films. And if you click on one of the films, then this is sort of the really interesting part. 26 films. They were all between 5 and 15 minutes. And they were on whatever you were interested in. If it was environment or transportation or urban design or economic development or the health of the Grant Creek or the interaction with the airport or the school system, whatever aspect people were interested in, they were able to click on a relatively short film and get up to speed. And yeah, I mean, so 1,000 views after the Charrette. When we closed for the week, a lot of people have watched these films, and they're still available. And 5 weeks later, 2,400 views. And if you just think about that, you just think about how it's out there and the plan, all of the ideas are getting more scrutiny. They're a lot more available to people. And they're just simple stuff created with software that pretty much comes with the computer. And it was cool. Urban designers like Pam, really talented architect, was just drawing and talking about what she was doing. Or people who've been thinking about Missoula, have lived there for a long time, talking about life and the ecosystem. Now, the other big part of it was the Engage tab. You go to the Engage tab on the website, and this is still available also. And there are poll questions and surveys and mapping. There are short polls and long polls, one-word cards. This was the interactive component on the website. If you clicked on one, for instance, like the first poll question that we asked, then it would open up and we were asking, what level of investment should we plan for on this site? So this site is nearly 2,000 acres, just 6 miles from downtown Missoula. It affects people's lives. And what is level of investment? Well, you'd click on the film and you'd find out what we meant about that. Graphics explained the concepts. You could watch these things at the comfort of your own home and take your time with it. And then you would answer the question. Level of investment is, the degree to which you're investing publicly or privately in the site. The density, the intensity. It's about the total number of units, the percent, and the quality and the character of open space, the amenities, the destinations that would be available, the traffic generation. It's sort of scenario planning, and 240 people took the time to engage that. And in general, they picked scenario 2, mix of units with an emphasis on affordability and complete centers. And then we'd pin up these renderings that were being created. Our team had really talented architects and illustrators working by hand sometimes or working with the computers. There's an image created by James Doherty, and it just asked this, what do you think of an image like this? There's a film that explained it, all of the thinking behind it, the different perspectives we heard, and people got to vote. We did simple exercises. This is a one-word card, one word that comes to mind about the Mullan area now and in the future. Now people talked about tranquil and farmland, but also congestion and overpriced, discombobulated, subdivision, suburbia. The more times we heard one answer, the larger the word appeared. And one word that came to mind about the Mullan area in the future, people said vibrant and livable community, compact, walkable. People were overwhelmingly positive. Another exercise, the community image survey, the visual preference survey, as it's sometimes known. It's just pictures of houses and places to shop and places to work and streets and open spaces, and people just voted whether they liked it or not. And here, so this was a whole lot of people. This was over 500 people participated in the community image surveys. And they liked the smaller houses around a little green. And that's, it's about the aesthetics of it, but it's also about affordability and sociability and urban design. If you're drawing the plan and you see images like this, you get a sense for what people want to see more of in their community and what they want to see less of. And just as Bill talked about this, over Kohl, we do a lot of charrettes. I probably do 10 or 12 a year. And the feedback loops of the design process are just really ingrained in us. They say you can go faster alone, but you go farther if you involve a lot of people. And to do that, you really do have to reconcile a lot of different viewpoints and take what people are saying into consideration. And one iteration after another, you're working toward a consensus plan that people can get excited about. And everyone doesn't get everything that they want. Hopefully by the end, everybody sees something they contributed. So the way that really looked, I was drawing and people were commenting, and we put up the draft maps and people would download them and print them out and draw on top of them and send it back to us. And we were having all these meetings, the 13 stakeholder meetings, and Tom and Andrew were calling, and city council people were calling, and we were incorporating everything in, and we're doing it all, in our own homes, socially distanced, physically, on our own. In the last days, I needed the scanner, so I took the big hand-drawn plan. I went to the office, nobody in the office, and I was finishing and scanning so we could put it all up for people to see. But, it wasn't just me. There was a whole talented group of people like Rob, who did so much of the computer programming for the website, and Emma did so much drawing. Jason Rice is the guy who understands the complex ecosystem and the endangered species in the area. Andrew and Tom were fielding calls and helping us with the tougher problems the site presented, like traffic or impact on the natural environment. Missoulians really care about the natural environment. We had designers drawing. We were on Facebook and Twitter, and Victor was helping a lot with that. We were liked, we were followed. We were trying to engage people wherever way we could. And it was, lockdown. So my kids were there in the other room, and it's fun to involve them, and you have to involve them. And so they were drawing on the plan, and here they're drawing their renderings. And some days Ellie's hair didn't get brushed, and they were in their pajamas as we continued to work, but it was kind of cool. And then I have to go out to get away from the kids or all the clamoring talented team and the questions, and just get outside and draw as we worked quickly, one pin up after another, taking in comments and rolling with the next design, and then posting them and creating quick films. So this is, here you see the site up close, between two major roads, not far from the downtown. As Tom mentioned, it's the last to help solve housing problems. There's a stream that needs to be restored. The plan is for a walkable mixed-use community, nearly 6,500 new units, multiple centers and leasable commercial, complete spaces, not your conventional suburban development, but something special. A lot of trails, restored ecosystem for endangered species like the trout, or spot for migrating ducks and birds to land, and a 40-acre new farm, community-supported agricultural community, which is one of the best ideas that came out of the project. We spent a lot of time working on. You should check out the film about, and everything, everything's online, even old drafts. You can see how the ideas changed. Street designs by Kenneth Garcia, explanatory graphics by people like James in our office, colored renderings, and just doing our best to make planning, which is sort of abstract, and zoning and land development regulations, and just make it about buildings and streets and public spaces. And people understand buildings and streets and public spaces, and put pictures of things that they're able to comment on. Anyway, so the total involvement, as Tom said, he had to convince a lot of people that this was going to work. We weren't sure either, but in terms of participation, it was just terrific. Over 280 people at the as part of that week. And just 2 weeks earlier, 3 weeks earlier, I was in Henrico County, Virginia. We had 80 people participate at a charrette, and that was great, and it felt terrific. But here the numbers were a lot higher. We had 2,400 views of YouTube films, 900 people interacted with the plan one way or another with the surveys or with the digital communications, 18,000 website views, and we were in the newspapers quite a bit, especially because we were trying something different, and the word got out. And that is critical to the field of planning or to all participatory government, because I'm just afraid as we're opening things up, it might be a while before this opens up again, before it's 400 people in a room like the last time we were in Montana. I'm just afraid that, with a disease that even the best doctor in the world can't tell you if you have it in the initial stages, I'm just afraid that we're going to need to take this online in order to get people to continue to participate and be involved. So we were asked to wrap up pros and cons. I found that the numbers were very, very high. Whereas the usual charrette might reach hundreds, we were reaching thousands one way or another. I liked the idea that people could pick and choose whatever they wanted, and if they were taking care of kids or of people who were sick or whatever came up, then late at night or early in the morning or on the weekends, they were able to learn about the project and then to send us emails and to interact with us. I like that it was a wide variety of participants. It wasn't just the usual suspects from city council night. There was people who had never, they would say this, I've never participated in public government before, and this is really cool. It was easier in a lot of ways, and it was cheaper in a lot of ways for consultants like our firm. We get to work all over the country and all over the world, and we were traveling less, and I got to spend more time making things to explain the project to people. I really liked the fact that our climate footprint, ordinarily we would have flown 5 or 6 people out to this event, and it's strange to, as a traveling consultant, to fly to, a conference on sustainability. There's a lot of meetings that don't need you there in person anymore now that the technology is as far as it is. And I like that we were helping close this digital divide. Everyone in the world, my kid's teacher or the church down the street, no one had any real choice. We were all forced to learn a lot more about computers, and the kids went home with computers, and people were learning how to participate in a meeting on their smartphone. We just had to make it as one click as possible, and I feel like I feel like we all learned a lot. I feel like there's less of a digital divide. The disadvantages, it is hard to communicate with people who of different opinions online. The problem with the small TEDx talks is it's hard to find common ground. And I like the charrette. I like just walking around and seeing places with people and sharing meals and just spending time with them. People I disagree with or people who have opinions who other people disagree with. I just like the time personally, and that's hard. I can't imagine. We have been to Missoula. It'd be hard to imagine. Although this is going to be my third virtual charrette is coming up. As this goes on further, we're going to be planning places that we do not see. We can only see virtually. And it's hard to listen to the land and get a feel online. And I also want to stress that the 100% virtual probably isn't right for every project. There are projects, long-range transportation plans, water quality plans, park plans, that can very easily and comfortably be 100% virtual. There are other projects in disadvantaged neighborhoods where what you're doing, for instance, is changing land values, and the end effect could be gentrification and evictions. Well, you really do have to be aware of the population you're planning for, and you've got to give them the right experience and the right kinds of access. When this whole lockdown ends, there might be very few 100% virtual projects. And so the degree to which you are virtual is also going to be a question. Build your audience early and send out regular reminders. I am a firm believer in invite absolutely everyone to absolutely everything, maximum public involvement, stay interactive. Even webinars like this could benefit from asking people questions and having them poll online, and modify the approach. Bill talked about sizing up the political consideration, sizing up the project, and modifying your approach based on the situation. I absolutely agree. But at the same time, I think every project could benefit with a lot of films, just people talking, not just the consultants, but we're allowing, of course, people to just create their own films and to post those. Instead of 3 minutes at the microphone, they're able to talk as long as they like. Expect pushback, of course. Different makes people uncomfortable. I think we're going to continue to do live charrettes, but I think there'll always be a virtual component in it. So I'm working at New Mexico State University, and I got the VP of SpaceX calling in from New York City, or a chancellor, or in this project in Mullan, the landowners, some of them lived in Seattle, and they were able to call in, and we were able to talk to them. I think it isn't enough just to have meetings in the high school auditorium anymore. We've got to have a virtual component to everything we do so that way people can participate. I believe that you shouldn't try to replicate. A lot of the people on the call right now are seasoned charretteers, and you charrette all the time. Just remember, this is a whole different thing. It's a different medium. It's got limitations and opportunities. Think about that. Don't just do the charrette that you've always been doing. Do something that works within the parameters of this new technology. And then the last thing is just to embrace a smaller, slower, and more personal approach to community planning. And that you'll just get a feel for as you go along. Tom has been thinking about the event that we had, and he's been talking to people and trying to figure out how well this worked or if it worked. And so, Tom, you had some pros and cons also?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. I have a few, and I did a little survey, and I wanted to know what people thought after they participated. And I have some cons here. I don't know that it probably was way weighted to the pros side in the comments, but what I heard most of was that participants felt more comfortable joining a technical discussion, and especially our staff members and the younger ones, they seem to be more comfortable in joining a technical discussion or stakeholder meeting than they would if they were in the room. Not sure exactly why that is, but I heard that a lot, and I think that's good. I want to mention that the facilitators that you had were really good, and they just provided a very calm environment for people to comment and to say whatever they thought, and make them feel like they were being listened to. And I think that part of this could be, I think that's a really important part of this, not to be thought of lightly. The other thing that our staff liked especially, and I know some of the other stakeholders liked it, was that they typically would go to stakeholder meetings that they were interested in, maybe if they could fit it into their schedule. The same with stakeholders. And in this case, you know, I could tell they dropped in on any meeting that they had time to, and they had more time and more opportunity to do that. So I think that the project people, or the people who are involved not 100%, were able to engage more just because it was easy for them to make a shorter amount of time to participate. So if they only had 15 minutes, they could still drop in on, say, a road design meeting. So a lot of people like that, and that might be the biggest pro for our staff. And the cons, you know, were kind of logistical, but and I don't think we experienced it to the point where it caused any kind of a problem. But I've started to think about, well, how many people can we actually involve in one meeting? And I know you all have thought about that, but I start to wonder, at what point do, like, a person like me have to think about splitting that up, or where that format would not be perfect for whatever we were working on. And then the biggest issue that I hear otherwise with regard to the virtual format is what you were talking about with regard to disadvantaged neighborhoods, or maybe a different age group in the population not being having easy access to the virtual meetings. And I actually think that a lot of those groups of people, I think this helped them have better access. And of course, with any method, you're going to always have problems with some segment or another of the population. But I just feel like that for me, looking at this method means that we're actually taking a step toward those groups rather than leaving them behind. So that's kind of my opinion there. I don't know if that would be the case everywhere, but that's kind of the way I felt after talking to people who participated. And, you know, I really, here we are 3 or 4 weeks later, and I'm really not heard much negative about this. And so that's kind of how I feel today, and I will let it go at that.
I just wanted to say, you know, people have been talking about how there's, you know, nothing good comes out of a pandemic, but if there is a silver lining, it's just people are learning to do things differently, and we can take what we learn into the future. And I like the idea that, as you say, Tom, that that perhaps going online is a step toward those people who are traditionally left out of the public process. I like the book Plague by Camus. He talks about the feeling of exile. That's the first thing the plague brings in his book about cholera in North Africa, exile. And it's important that we all stay connected and do that however we can. So if anybody out there is interested, go to MullanAreaMasterPlan.com so you can learn more and see how we did it. It's not the only way to do it. And if you're working on an interesting project and you have some you have tips or you've got questions, then here's my email, jking@dovercoal.com, and I would love to continue this conversation about this thing that we're doing.
Jason and Tom, this is Marta again. Thank you both very much. Very interesting overview. And I just want our participants to know that we have participating in this webinar more than 650 people, and we've gotten almost 60 questions to be addressed. And so obviously we're not going to get to all of them today. But we will find other ways to answer them, and I will be asking some of them very shortly. But first, I wanted to remind everybody, and particularly those who just joined us since we spoke before, that there is a questionnaire after we finish here. And particularly, we're interested in learning what topics you would like us to address regarding online community engagement in our next 2 webinars, which we will be having over the next few weeks. So now I'm going to pose to a couple of questions to the 2 of you, as well as Victor Dover, who also from Dover Kohl, who also worked on the charrette, and Bill as a charrette expert, to you as well. So we have, since we began our conversation, not just today, but in the past, about online community engagement, the question of inclusion, and today we got many questions about populations and individuals who may not have the technology or may not be comfortable speaking in English or may not have been aware or engaged. And what do you do about it? How do you address it? Do you think, Tom, you said that your impression was that it was relatively well received from most of the population, but perhaps, Tom, if you would talk a little bit about what Missoula did to include as many different perspectives and points of view and interests as possible, as Bill Leonard's mentioned is important in a charrette. What did you do? How did you succeed? Where do you think you could do better next time? And then Jason, and if you could, Tom, pretty quickly talk about how Missoula approached that. And then Jason, if you could talk about some of the techniques. One of the questions that we had was about how do you use a phone, a smartphone or a mobile phone for engagement when people are not, don't have access or not comfortable using computers. So Tom, if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit about what Missoula did to reach out to as broad stakeholder groups as possible. Tom, you may be on mute.
I think I muted myself.
Okay, there you go.
We completed a growth policy project about 4 years ago, and we've known this forever, but we've started to notice people not coming to public meetings as much, and so for that we just decided to try everything under the sun. And in that case, we wound up doing 80 different events over the course of 6 months, and we tried everything. I think the thing we learned was we need to go to them. And so for this, we did a broad outreach with the help of Dover Kohl, and we were promoting this as an in-person type of event. So all of our outreach was to people thinking it would be that way. And then of course at the last minute we had to change. So the one thing that I did throughout that process was to constantly message everybody that we're doing this to get a minimal amount of information to help us advise this other project, but by no means is this going to constitute our full outreach right now. We are, and I would say this going on forever, is that this is going to be a major part of what we do. I think we're going to find as more people become comfortable that it will become bigger, but we're always going to go to places, and we're going to go to neighborhood meetings. We're going to go to the senior center. We're going to go, and I mean, we just do that as it is. So we've just learned that when we do that, we hear all the viewpoints, and we can then have a successful project. And not only do we hear their viewpoints, we'll have support when we get into the legislative part later on. So there's just all kinds of benefits to that. And I can't even list them all, but to be honest, our outreach was done in a way that we were going to do in-person meetings. Then we had to just flip around and go right back to all the same sources and say, we are changing this to this. And Dover Kohl made they made it so that the link was easy to access, and I believe about as easy as it could be to get into these different virtual meetings. And I think that's really important. It seems like not a big deal, especially to younger folks, but to have a one-click access is really important. And I think, I hate to say that, but I mean, that alone can bring different groups into the conversation. So, beyond that, we try everything under the sun as far as outreach goes every time. And we couldn't do that now. We will be doing that here later in the summer or when we can. And I have the feeling we're not going to be able to do some of the large group things. So this idea that Jason has about having the drop-in design studio, that is, I think, going to be a big deal coming up. But I'm not sure if I answered your question completely there, but just the fact that we only had a few days to flip that, I hate to say that we were amazing and complete about it, but I think we did a good job of trying to recontact everybody.
Great, thank you. Jason, some strategies from the perspective of Dover Kohl that you use to reach out, particularly to groups or populations that may exist in Missoula that might not automatically get online or even show up to a meeting.
Right, yeah. So Bill Leonard's book, the Charrette Manual, talks about all the different approach that you use, and they are the same for the live events as for the virtual event. And the mailers, the flyers, emails, save the date cards, social media, public access, announcements at public meetings, and really important, the personal invitations that people make. Andrew with the county and Tom with the city both did a lot of that. And as Tom said, we just had, once all the invitations were out and word was out and people were excited, we then had to pivot to the virtual. And what's important about the charrette is, in a lot of ways, it goes in addition to, on top of, the usual legal process, the public meeting process required by law, which is to say, in some ways, it's sort of extra. There will still be live, one way or another, meetings before anything is adopted. We're talking about zoning and land development regulation changes. There are a lot of meetings that follow the charrette. And what we try to do is keep the group that we brought together there throughout the entire process. Now, we don't know what the CDC will let us do. But as Tom said, we look forward to going to Missoula and to follow up the work that we did virtually with live events and discussions with people.
Great, thank you. So I think in the conversations that we've had with you folks, but also with others who have done virtual engagement, I think what they find is that it brings some new perspectives and new opportunities for engagement to the conversation, but also it's one tool that ideally, when we can get back together again, that some blend, designed to fit the needs of a particular stakeholder or series of stakeholder groups and the particular set of issues that you're working on, is probably going to be optimum. We're learning about some new tools that we will then blend into the face-to-face tools to create richer community engagement programs for whatever the issue and the population requires.
And Marta, if I could just say one thing from NCI, all this is prefaced on the the good old way of looking at stakeholders and analyzing them from the beginning. So we have a stakeholder analysis where you go through and define the viewpoints, the people, what their issues are, what's a win to them, and how to involve them. And it's all about creating relationships. So that forms the basis for any type of tool that you use. And it's important to begin with that before the charrette.
Good point. And Victor Dover, I just thought if you had anything to add to this conversation about inclusion, I wanted to give you an opportunity to make some comments as well, because I know you've done now several of these.
It is a very important question, and I read through the Q&A as they were arriving, and clearly it's the number one question we received today. Everybody's concerned about making sure that we don't inadvertently miss information or perspectives that will inform the plan from people who lack skills with computers, or lack broadband access, or lack computers, period. Now, we need to keep that in perspective, because let's remember that when we have a typical meeting on a weeknight at a elementary school cafeteria, or we have public meeting at the city council chambers, a tiny percentage of the population overall manages to make it inside those buildings and come to those meetings. So that's setting the bar pretty low. Some of the folks who have asked the question about the digital divide and who might be inadvertently left out should have been asking for the last 20 or 30 or 50 years about all those people that are left out by the traditional in-person meetings. But setting that aside for a second, in Missoula County, and in Missoula in particular, a lack of broadband access, while it exists, is affecting a relatively small percentage of the population. You have 93% of the people in the city of Missoula have computers, have ready, steady access to computers. So, and that's as of 2018. I think that number, as Jason described, just went up a lot when schools sent computers home with kids who needed to do homeschooling during stay-at-home orders. So it's really a matter of both and, not either or, as Jason was saying. We need to look for ways to get more and more people from all walks of life to participate. But we do need to understand that the problem we're being asked about with regard to the digital divide is just a reflection of the problem that existed all along about traditionally underrepresented communities. I would wager that the percentage of people who are intimidated and turned off by the idea of going to a tedious meeting at City Hall is much, much greater than the number of people who can't find a way to get to a computer or a telephone. And I say or a telephone because a couple of questions were about that. We didn't go into any detail here, but another of our tools is a telephone town hall. We're probably going to deploy that in Missoula over the coming weeks. We're using it in a couple of other cities, but that is a really simple, low-tech tool that doesn't require a computer, doesn't require broadband, doesn't require a smartphone. All it does is requires you to offer up your telephone number. So if we have a list of telephone numbers, we can push a call to those numbers, the phone rings, you answer it. All you have to do to participate is just stay on the line and not hang up. If you haven't tried that technique, it's a very useful one. It's not going to allow you to show all the visuals and show people the maps and all that. At least you can tell them about what's going on in the process, and you can answer some frequently asked questions about it. And in the more advanced versions, they can press a button on their touch-tone phone and record a question. So I think that technology, which we see all the congressmen and congresswomen using around now as they're doing town halls back in their home states about how to reopen the economy and so on, that's becoming even more customary. And it's so low tech and so accessible. Everyone has a telephone, can use it. I think we will also see that coming to have a place here. Let me just say, I think one last thing, Marta, about the immediate pushback that comes up when we talk about going virtual. I have seen this before, and I don't mean to be dismissive of it at all, because I think it's a normal, natural human response. And it's not wrong. The concern is people are asking questions like, is this the right thing to do everywhere? Of course it's not. In Missoula and in Neptune Beach, where we did a virtual charrette 2 weeks later, those are places we know very well, for example, and places where we know the people very well. So they are good candidates for us in our firm to be able to take on this next project or this next work on the project without having to be in person in the city to do it. But we will be back in the city before long. I've seen this tendency to say, wait a minute, are you sure this is going to work? Or are you sure this applies everywhere? Before, it's very familiar. I'm sorry, I can't help but think by analogy. It's what urbanists do. We've been here before. Bill, do you remember a long time ago when people first started talking about introducing modern roundabouts into intersection designs? Remember that? And the instant response was, wait, that's not going to work at every intersection. And of course, that's correct. It doesn't work at every intersection. It's not the solution. It's a great idea in the right place at the right time. It's not the solution for everything. But just like the roundabout thing, this stuff of going virtual with charrettes brings out the critics who are worrying about it before it's implemented. And I suspect that we will see the same thing happen here that we saw with the reintroduction of modern roundabouts, which is that once they're implemented, people say, wow, that's pretty cool.
Thank you, Victor. I think that's an interesting perspective. And this is a topic that we got a lot of really good questions on it, having to do with multilingual engagement and having to do with technology access and elderly. So I think that we will certainly focus on strategies for inclusion and problems with online inclusion as one of the topics for our sessions, because we can dig into this a lot more, I think. Another question that came up quite a bit, we must have a lot of people from the public sector on today, because there were several questions, many questions about the cost of an online charrette, and both in terms of what it costs comparatively to do an online charrette versus an in-person charrette, and sort of how you were able to fund the transition, and just several questions having to do with what does this cost and how does it compare with if you had done the whole thing on face-to-face. So I don't know, maybe Tom, if you want to start with that, and then Jason, you want to talk a little bit from your perspective, how you worked with the city to adjust. But Tom, what difference did it make in your budget in terms of having to do this online? And check your mute.
I think that it didn't make much of a difference, but I'm going to leave that to Jason, just because I think they were so prepared to do it. And of course, I was thinking about when we did it, what would have happened if we had a different company doing this, which we could easily have had, and with another company, they just might not have been able to do it at all. Although I think it's something that really is going to, be easy enough for anybody to do, and to do it in the most sophisticated way they want to or not. But I think cost, it generally, I would think it should be less.
Okay.
And that's just, as long as everybody's got the software and it's something that everybody can access in the public realm. At first that was one of the first things that came to my mind. And, when you get down to it, it really has more to do with say in this case, Jason's preparation than it did with the actual, logistics of setting it up. So he may have a better answer than I do there, but my answer is, doesn't seem like there's much of a difference. And I have the feeling in the future it could be significantly lower, actually.
Right. Thanks. Jason, before we let you kind of give us at least the short answer, I wanted to do a quick time check, because believe it or not, our hour and 15 minutes are also up, are almost up. I wanted to thank everybody and encourage you. We will be sending out a link to we have recorded this webinar. There will also be a transcript, and we will be answering additional questions. But I think these questions about tools and techniques, including the cost, will be covered in our next webinar. And then we will also address in a webinar, perhaps our third webinar, the questions and strategies around inclusion. Jason, why don't you just finish up for us in terms of your perspective on the relative costs?
Sure, I think Tom's gut feeling is correct. It's more consulting and it's less expensive. You know, we save on hotel and we save on restaurants and we save on plane flights. We bring a whole team out for these events. Instead, again, that team got to work on these films. And I think in terms of reaching more people in the long term, the savings, well, we'll just say the cost per person that you reach feels like it's less when we.
So thank you. And I want to thank everyone who joined us today on behalf of the National Charrette Institute and the Form-Based Codes Institute at Smart Growth America. Your questions were great. We welcome your participation from all over the world, and we will send you a follow-up email with the links and information about our next webinars. So, and thank you, Holly, for all of your work in organizing and helping pull all this together. Any last words?
I would ask Jason if you could go ahead just a couple slides to the very end with some URLs for where you can get more information, and please feel free to reach out to us. As Jason said, if you had tips or insights that you wanted to share, we're happy to hear them and pass around. I also wanted to just say thank you to our speakers for your time, for sharing your insights and your wisdom with us, and thank you everyone for being on the call today.
And we look forward to seeing you again.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, and have a good rest of the day, and stay healthy, everybody.
Right. Thanks, Marta. Bye-bye.